So who wants swag? What I mean is, for those of you who've emailed who want the tax rep mug, the tax rep travel Yeti mug, the tax rep t-shirt, we love tax problems. If you're interested in getting some tax rep swag, you can't buy it. There's no store. We don't sell it. Here's what you do. In iTunes or Apple Podcasts, subscribe to the podcast, give us a 5-star review, take a screenshot of that and email it to us at hello@taxrepllc.com. hello@taxrepllc.com. Send it to us along with your address, and if you want the t-shirt, your t-shirt size, and we will send you out a piece of swag. Our pleasure. Okay, enjoy it. It's great stuff. All right. So again, if you want some swag, go out, subscribe to the podcast. I know in Apple and iTunes, you can actually give us a review, give us a 5-star review, email us a screenshot of that with your address and what piece of swag you want, and we will get it out to you, no problem. All right. Now, if you want to talk about building your practice, okay, and we're going to get real busy in 2021, so there's never been a better time. All right, join Tax Rep LLC. All right, join Tax Rep LLC, and trust me, we can help you build your practice, add an extra $100,000 to your bottom line, and get you involved in really representing taxpayers. Okay, so taxrepllc.com. Go out, sign up. We'll see you inside Tax Rep. Now, what do we use in our practice? All right. The only two sponsors we have of the podcast are the two pieces of software / vendors that we use for tax resolution. Tax Help software, okay, which is the cornerstone of our practice. Everything from transcripts to intelligent ordering overnight to actually doing our offers and all of our resolution forms. All right. So if you're interested, go to taxhelpsoftware.com. There are 2 discount codes we've arranged for you. All right. Tax Rep Trial, all caps, one word, will get you a 2-week free trial. Tax Rep 10, Tax Rep 10, all caps, one word, will get you 10% off. Go check it out. It is what we use day in and day out. All right. It's what we think is the best. That's why we use it. And it's the only sponsor we have because it's the only software that we use. Now, built into Tax Help software or as a standalone program is ENQ. And that is how we call the government and get in under 3 minutes. All right. And we've arranged for a special discount for our Tax Rep members and listeners. All right. I'll put the link in the description below. You can click on that link, go. You get 200 minutes for $19.95. It will change the way you practice. You can literally call the IRS, get to a human being in under 3 minutes, usually within 30 seconds. All right. So check out ENQ at the link below. Thanks for listening, guys, and enjoy this week's program. This week's episode is about the IRS takedown of Silk Road and the drug lord behind it. So, do you know the story of Frank Wilson? Frank Wilson is perhaps the most famous IRS agent who ever lived, within the IRS, of course. It was he, not Elliot Ness, who took down the most famous mobster in history, Alphonse Capone. Frank Wilson did not work alone. He had help. Another IRS undercover agent, Michael Malone, worked inside the Capone organization and assisted taking down the famous gangster. That was 1931, but our story takes place 82 years later. In June 2013, an IRS special agent by the name of Gary Alford spent weekends and nights combing through online sites, arcane chat rooms, old blog posts, and websites, reading everything he could looking for clues. All of this work led Special Agent Alfred to the identity of the drug lord who had created the dark web drug bazaar called Silk Road, run by a mysterious person who went by the name the Dread Pirate Roberts, which for those of you old enough is a character from the movie Princess Bride. It would take Agent Alfred another 3 months before he finally had enough to convince the other federal agents he was working with that they had their man. That man, Ross Ulbricht, was a 29-year-old in San Francisco running a massive billion-dollar criminal market that sold everything from drugs to the services of hitmen. He was convicted in 2015 and sentenced to life in prison. On November 5th of this year, IRS announced it had filed a civil complaint to forfeit thousands of Bitcoins valued at over $1 billion seized by law enforcement, all of which is tied to Silk Road. According to the allegations of the civil forfeiture complaint, from 2011 until October 2013, when it was seized by law enforcement, Silk Road was the most sophisticated and extensive criminal marketplace on the internet. It served as a sprawling black market bazaar where unlawful goods and services were bought and sold regularly by the site's users. Joining me to discuss that investigation and the takedown of Silk Road is none other than the special agent who helped make it happen, Gary Alford. For those of you who do not know Gary, he's a supervisory special agent with the Internal Revenue Service's Criminal Investigation Division here in New Haven, which is part of the Boston Field Office. He currently serves as the fraud coordinator for the Boston Field Office. He also served as its first ever cyber strategy lead and authored IRS-CI's initial cyber strategy. Moreover, previously, Mr. Alford was the lead cybercrime coordinator for the New York field office of IRS-CI and led the drafting and implementation of its first cybercrime strategy. During his career, Mr. Alford spent 3 years embedded into a DEA New York NY organized crime drug enforcement strike force squad, the one focusing on Silk Road, by the way. Moreover, Mr. Alford also spent 3 years embedded into an FBI cyber squad in the New York field office. Before becoming a special agent, he was previously employed as a duly commissioned Internal Revenue agent in the Small Business Self-Employed Division of the IRS. He received his BBA in accounting from Baruch College of the City University of New York. During his meritorious career, Mr. Alford was nominated by the FBI for the FBI Director's Award for Outstanding Cyber Investigation. Moreover, he has received the IRS-CI's Chief Award for Investigative Excellence, the Attorney General's Award for Distinguished Service, the Treasury Secretary's Honor Award, and is featured in an exhibit at the National Law Enforcement Museum in Washington, D.C. He has been featured in print, television, radio, podcasts, and film, including but not limited to the New York Times, CBS, the New York Daily News, Vanity Fair, BBC Radio, a New York Times bestselling book, and then an A&E BBC feature-length documentary, which won the award for Best Crime Documentary of the Year at the prestigious International Film Festival. If you are interested, I highly recommend that documentary. It is called Silk Road. I believe it's Silk Road, Drugs and Death on the Dark Web. It's an hour and a half. It is an amazing documentary. Gary is interviewed as part of it. Really great fit for any of us who are interested in this topic. All right, so Gary, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So listen, obviously I want to get in and discuss Silk Road, but you started off, believe you went to Baruch, right?
Yes.
Accounting, and started off on the civil exam side. How did you end up going from civil examiner to cyber sleuth and IRS criminal? Can you walk us through sort of your earlier career?
Well, yes. I started as a civil examiner, a revenue agent in Long Island in the Garden City office. And why Garden City? Because I grew up in Brooklyn. That's what they were hiring. There was a freeze and I was just lucky to get into there. And I had no idea of ever going into law enforcement. I had applied when I was younger because my parents worked like in social services. So I had to take all the tests. But I never met a special agent. I never thought about being a special agent. But one of the people I was hired with actually had applied to CI and to become a special agent. So through him, I found out about the process. And he actually was applying to be in the office in Long Island. So as I heard from him and talked with him, I learned more about the job. And frankly, the thing that got me interested was the early retirement and the car. And not that like I wanted it, was because I was growing up, I was in Brooklyn. I actually had no driver's license. And I just wanted to get closer. And I was like, well, if I got a car, I could potentially buy a house, because back then housing prices were ridiculous. And I was like, maybe I could get a car because I can't afford one where the offices were. So that's what first got me interested in it. And I applied, and about 3 years later, after getting transferred to the Midtown Manhattan office, I got selected to become a special agent. So really, it was so I could it really was about family. It was really about I could retire early and I could potentially buy a house and start a family. And that's how I got into CI, but I wanted to work tax cases. So you ask how I became a cyber sleuth. That's an interesting story. It was basically like a life interrupted. It was just a case assigned to me in a new detail, and I had no thought process of ever doing. I didn't even think I had a personal computer at the time. The only laptop I had was work, and so that's how I got assigned this. You'll learn about it, the Silk Road case, and I had to learn.
Well, what's funny is, and I want to ask you about this. It seems that over time, a lot of the special agents, and we've had a number of them on the podcast, they seem to end up finding a niche, structuring, or and money laundering, or I mean, everyone seems to do routine payroll cases, income tax cases, but I do find it interesting how some people seem to get known. And so when I would call and say, "Hey, do we have someone who can talk about this?" They'll be like, "Oh yeah, you want so and so."
Correct.
Why? Oh well, she does that. Okay. Is it something like accidental, where it just happens to fall on your desk and you find out you're good at it, and people keep giving it to you? Or I mean, or is it something that you normally go and seek out?
I would say it's two things. Best case scenario is you choose something you're interested in, but more times than not, it's the agency chooses for you. Now, either way, I would say it's usually a compliment, because if they usually pigeonhole you, that means you're getting results. So usually, whether you choose it and you're lucky enough to choose something before they choose for you, you're getting a lot of results. And that's what they like, consistent results. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now, unfortunately, there's only so many, let's say, good agents to go around. So they're like, well, that's good. You're good at that. But unfortunately, we already got someone else who's good at that.
Right.
So we need somebody to do this. So in terms, I guess, in cyber at the time, we didn't have anybody really focus on cyber. But I gather I was one of the people that I used to always say, if I don't know today, I'll know by tomorrow. So I always had that positive attitude in anything, which I guess was a little bit to my detriment. So then they said, hey, here's this case. And I thought I would have a little bit of success in it. I think I a little bit overshot it. And then that's it. They were like, you're going to be in it.
Well, let's go there. So you show up, you're now in CI. When did Silk Road land on your desk?
It landed on my desk in February of 2013. That's the first time I heard about any of these things. And I remember it to a T, because I was headed to a meeting with our big boss, the special agent in charge of the New York field office. So I tell you, I had my suit on, I had my Sunday best on, because there was a big meeting and you don't want to be late. So I was going to the meeting and I get stopped by my supervisor, and he said, come in my office. And I'm like, oh no, I'm all ready. I'm late I got to get to this meeting. And he's like, no, come in the office. And for people in CI, that's a bad sign.
Yeah.
So I was like, uh-oh, what did I do? So as soon as I turned, my other boss, the ASAC, came around the corner, and I was like, uh-oh, this is a setup. And so I got called into the office, and then they told me, hey, have you heard about this Silk Road? I had no idea what they were talking about. Right. So they said, well, we have a great opportunity for you. We have this case we want you to take over. Oh, and by the way, it would require you to work in the DEA task force or strike force, which is something I wasn't really looking forward to doing. I signed up to work for the IRS. I didn't sign up to work in the DEA. Right? And so they basically was like, we want you to take over this case for Silk Road. And I was like, I had no idea what it was. So they kind of explained it. It was like, well, it's a site that sells drugs. They use it on Tor, and they have Bitcoin. And it's like, well, have you ever heard of Tor? And, no. Have you heard of Bitcoin? No. You never heard of Silk Road? No. And they asked, can you handle it? And my answer was yes, I could handle it. So long story short, that's basically how I got the case.
Here's what's interesting. And I have a lot of friends I grew up with who ultimately went into special forces, Navy SEALs and Delta Force. And what's interesting is they will tell you that what you really learn when you go into special forces is you learn how to think and adapt. And so a lot of it is, what do I need to learn to accomplish this task? And so, like they said, and in fact, they said, they watch the stuff on TV where they're running around with the boats and logs and that's just to weed people out. They said the real experience is when you become a commando, and now you're learning tactics and how in chaos you need to be calm and think and adapt. And in a way, it's sort of similar, because you get thrown this and you have to learn what Tor is, and we'll get into that. Bitcoin, which is pretty brand new, which, by the way, to this day, I'm not sure I understand.
Right.
A blockchain and all that. Encryption. I mean, when you get into Silk Road, and for the people who are listening, if you have not gone, there is an A&E special on this where they kind of go through the case. You're interviewed, as well as the FBI agent. I think the DEA agent was interviewed. You had a big learning curve. I mean,
yes.
And so, again, for those people listening, you hear about the dark web. Can you explain what it is? I mean, and it's very hard because I barely understand what the internet is. It's all interconnected computers. What is this dark web?
Well, this is what I explain to people. So what I tell people is, I drive a car, and if you ask me how it works, I have no idea. But what is a car? It gets me from point A to point B. So what is the darknet? The darknet is a browser, just like Google, just like Internet Explorer. It's just a browser, but it has a special feature. The special feature, it hides your IP. So normally, if you go on the internet, they want to sell you ads. So they want to know, who is this? And if they don't know who you are, it's an IP. But it basically is a browser that hides the users, which is kind of interesting. So it uses encryption, and I'm not going to explain it here, but just trust me, it works, because they had MIT geniuses working on this, and the government actually helped fund it. So its use wasn't bad. When it first came out, it was used because you can imagine, let's say you live in a totalitarian regime, and they want to restrict they don't want you to know about freedom or education or history. Well, you could use this browser and make it seem like you're coming from someplace else, so they can't block you and get this information. However, what the darknet is an additional feature. So they first had that, and so people would browse. Let's say you can go to any website and learn. But this
So in China, I could download Tor, which I think was publicly available, which is the browser.
Right.
And then in China, I could avoid the government cracking down on me, so I could go read Western news or whatever.
Right. Yes, and you can see for the government, it also was beneficial, because let's say, hypothetically, you have an asset in another country, but let's say you're 6'3" and you kind of stick out. So they kind of know you're American,
right?
But you don't want to know that you're communicating. So they're like, well, I know who they are. So not only does it encrypts so if you grab the communications, so some just encrypt your communication so you can't read it, but it also hides the fact that you are communicating. Like you said, it makes it seem like you're coming out of another country. So they can't even tell you're actually communicating, because imagine if somebody was watching a soldier or something like that, they want to know, hey, if there's any messages going back and forth. And that in and of itself might be very valuable to an adversary.
Right.
So what it does, it kind of hides it. So that browser used to be able to do that. But what the darknet did is that at some point they added an additional feature, which is kind of strange because it doesn't kind of work towards that end, is you could hide the actual IP of a website. So like I said before, you want to go to a history place or a place to get videos or learn something. Well, that's not hidden. You just want to hide the fact that you're going there. But this actual feature, and it's called Tor Hidden Services, it actually hid the website, which is weird because...
Which is weird because if you're going to start Silk Road, don't you want people to find it?
Exactly. It's like any other store. So I tell people, think of the darknet as a traveling marketplace. So instead of a big mall, which is normally come to the mall, sales at the mall,
Yep.
the darknet could hide. So it would a market could pop up anywhere, and they could change a location all the time. So let's say the authorities are trying to shut it down. Well, 1 minute it's downtown, 1 minute it's uptown, 1 minute it's another state. Well, where's the address? We're not going to tell you. So it would hide the fact of this website, which was strange when I learned about it, because why would someone not want to know where the store is? That makes no sense. I want to spend my money, but I can't find the store. But that's what Tor Hidden Services did, and that's the darknet. So the darknet is basically you're hiding the websites and you're hiding the users. So you can imagine if there's a drug selling website, this might be valuable.
Well, except for I assume at some point there is a way to find the store. So I download Tor. There's got to be a way through it to find what I want. Silk Road, which is now gone, but whatever. You know, and so to get back to Silk Road. So, you know, again, based on what the media says, for about 2 years, they're trying to figure out how to find Silk Road, how to find the person, the administrator who's running this, the server they couldn't find.
Right.
And here comes Gary, right? Who
Right.
doesn't know what Silk Road even is. Can you walk us through kind of how did this happen? I mean, so you get this file. You're now the new guy on this, what I assume is a pretty big, and it sounds like dispersed team. There are people in Chicago, people in New York, people wherever. Where do you even begin?
Well, yeah. So by the time I come in, Silk Road had it was very profitable. Now you bring up a good point. There's a difference between the server. When I say they can't find it, they're trying to find the server, because every website, it's a computer. So we're trying to find the computer. And there's people everywhere. So the team I'm assigned to is in New York. So you hear about other teams and they have various levels of success. But to me, I was like, I don't think anyone's getting anywhere because the site's still running. And you mentioned it was high profile. Yes, it was high profile. Because from my understanding, it was open because of a senator. I think it was Senator Schumer, Joe Manchin.
They were calling on the government to shut it down. And that's great. We have to find it first.
Well, yeah. And it actually was great advertising, because I guess in the press conference, he said, here's this website. And some people were like, what website? You just said it. Well, this is how you find it. So how do you find it? You actually have to know the specific address. They can't advertise it. And then he says, we can't shut it down. So I guess some people said, oh my God, there's a website selling drugs. This is terrible. But some other people said, wait, there's a website? Oh, I'm going there.
Yeah.
So it ended up skyrocketing in popularity. So for me, I had to find out what the New York investigation knew. And it's not against anyone. They were trying the techniques that were used against normal drug trafficking, and it just wasn't working. But you kind of hit on what I thought. At the end of the day, how do you find this place? Well, how do you find your local drug dealer? Someone's selling drugs potentially in your neighborhood, but if you don't know the right person, now luckily Chuck Schumer told the whole world where they could find it. But before that, I said, well, if I had I used to like hand out flyers for a pizza restaurant. If I opened up a pizza restaurant and no one knew I opened it, what would I do? I start passing some flyers around. So that's what I thought. I was like, well, when this was first started, I just thought of it as a business, because a lot of people just look at an illegal business as, oh, they don't really think about it. But an illegal business is still a business. You have expenses. And that's what I thought about. And I definitely knew nothing about Bitcoin and Tor. So I was like, that's not going to be my strength. I'm going to find some other way to figure out how the site was opened and generating profits.
Now, I know the documentary now, and who knows how accurate it is, went into this, where effectively you did Google searches, narrowed it down, and picked up on a posting that led you to potentially, or what you didn't know then, but now we know, was the identity of the admin of the site. Is that accurate? Is that kind of how it happened?
Yes, yes, that's exactly what happened. I mean, when I got assigned to the case, no one said, Gary, because there's FBI, there's DEA, there's a bunch of very smart, there's journalists. This is like a big mystery. So no one said, oh, let's get this IRS guy who knows nothing about Bitcoin. He's going to save the day. We were just trying to get some success in the case. But yes, what I was thinking about the site, I was like, well, if I was opening this site, because I was thinking, whoever opened this site is just like me. So when he starts it or she starts it, they have a computer. They're like, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to put it on this tour. And then I got to let people know where it is because you have to get it out there. Now, you're not going to say, hey, I'm Gary Alford. Come to my illegal drug site. Right. So I said, let me just figure out, just like an audit, let me go to the beginning. So let me try to get as much information I can at the beginning. So I started doing these Google searches and I was very good at it because I learned it as a revenue agent, how to look at historical, because sometimes people's businesses, the websites go away, but you find the little breadcrumbs. And so, yes, I found postings for somebody, this avatar or these two things on sites where they were kind of saying like, hey, check out Silk Road. It looks kind of interesting. Well, looking into those postings, I figured out who was behind those postings. And it was this individual, Ross Ulbricht. And he had a very unique name. I don't think there's another Ross Ulbricht I've ever come across, or there might only be one Ross Ulbricht in the world. So it was very interesting to find a lot of information about him. And what's interesting is as soon as I start researching him, I'm like, this looks like the guy. But a lot of people didn't see it that way because when you learned about him, he was like the nicest guy. He was an Eagle Scout. But as a person who worked in audit and exam and done tax cases, I'm like, no, he looks exactly right. Because I was saying, if you're running a website and you're on it all the time, you probably don't have a job. So what's very interesting is he had a public footprint, but then it went away just around Silk Road was. He had no sources of income. Everything that the owner operator of the site was saying in the disguise, he was known as Dread Pirate Roberts, Ross Ulbricht liked. And so there were just too many coincidences. Plus he fit what I imagined. Because when I got on the site, I kind of listened to what the owner operator would say. He was whoever was running the site gave a lot of speeches and was very political in the way they spoke. And it kind of matched up. I was like, oh, it's just like anecdotal for me growing up in Brooklyn. I was like, well, I think I know who this person is or where they're from. They're not from where I grew up because some of the things they would say about drugs, and I was like, no, they didn't grow up in, let's say, Brooklyn, New York, or any area like that. They grew up someplace else.
And so ultimately, they did find the server. They managed to find the server, and I thought this was funny. So they managed to look, I guess, ping and find. They end up identifying the server in Iceland.
Yes.
Get a copy of the computer. They don't take it down, which I find interesting. They left it up. They get a copy, and they notice the admin is logging in as, I think it was Frosty.
Well, you say you found the server. There was I guess you got to talk about which time.
Okay.
So I think they found this a copy of a server at one time. Because listen, there's different ways when you find a server, and I'm not going to get into too much, but sometimes you get a copy of it, but it's a copy of it in time. So yes, the FBI did find the server, and what you're talking about is when they find out the person logging in. So I guess they get a copy of the server. They've done what is thought of as impossible, but nothing on the actual server said who it is. And at the time, they didn't know who Ross Ulbricht was. But I guess when you log into your computer, so if you log into your computer and you set it up and it's user, but they knew on that server, whoever the user was, the computer was named Frosty and the user was named Frosty. So when they logged in, they could see in the back end of the server, they could see it's Frosty at Frosty. So Frosty, the user, with a trusted computer logging into Frosty. But it really meant nothing because Frosty could be anything. It could be right. So at the time they said, we got this server. I'm assuming I wasn't part of that team then, but they were like, we got it. we're gonna take the site down. Well, now you have this server. Now what do you do? But you still are not any closer until finding who it was. Until eventually they came and met me.
And you have, because you had identified Ross Ulbricht, and again, I'm going by memory, but there was some posting or something where he used the avatar.
Right. So he was using one avatar, but I guess, and this is very funny because, like I said, I didn't have a personal computer, and my then fiance at the time was working, so I was using her computer, but she had a Google account, and if I noticed, anytime she would sign in, if you were in a Google type website, it would notice that. So what it looks like, or something like that, he was posting on a website that you could ask programming questions. So imagine you're running. So I'm thinking at this time, Ross Ulbricht is running this site. So I see that he's asking questions on this programming website, and he's asking questions about Tor hidden services. So I'm like, this is him. Why does somebody need to know about Tor hidden services and programming one unless you're running one?
Right.
But what it looked like he did was he switched his name. So this is going to take some explaining. So what it looks like he did was he signed in under his actual name, but then realized that was a mistake, and then switched his name on the site to Frosty. Well, if some people ever look on the news, if they ever notice, is that some websites scrape information from another website. So let's say Reuters goes an article. Well, then another website will say, hey, read this article, but really they got it from another website.
Mm-hmm.
So on another website, they had scraped that question from the original website, but captured it was Ross Ulbricht who asked the question. But when you clicked on it, it took you to the original posting and it said Frosty. So I just wrote that down as a potential alias. So I'm like, oh, Frosty. So I'm keeping track. So it was very good. I learned to keep track of all my records, because later on, when I met with the Bureau and I was telling them, I think it's this Ross Ulbricht. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, he's from California. He fits the bill, everything he likes. And I guess they just weren't hearing it. And then I guess in exasperation, lastly, I said, well, he's also going by Frosty and he's asking these questions on this website. And I guess the FBI was like, wait, what did you say? And I was like, so I am talking about the question, because to me, that's the most important thing. He's asking questions about Tor hidden services. They're like, oh, what's that about Frosty? I was like, Frosty, that's the name he went by, Frosty. Say that again, Frosty. So at that time, I hate to say it, but I thought the FBI agent was very dismissive. So I was a little bit annoyed. It's like, why do you keep asking that? His name's Frosty, Frosty. And that's when he said, oh, well, the server for Silk Road, the username was Frosty, and the server name was Frosty. So Frosty at Frosty. And that's when everybody was quiet on the call, because they knew that.
Now it looks really good, like Mr. Ulbricht is the
yeah,
guy.
So now, oh yeah, that all makes sense. Oh yeah, everything else. So then once they saw that, all the other connections in other people's minds came together. Like everything about Mr. Ulbricht matched up with Good Pirate Roberts, other than he was an Eagle Scout and the nicest person anyone's ever met. And I said, well, I never said he wasn't the nicest person that he ever met. I just said, I think he's running Silk Road.
He may be a great guy. I just think he's running a massive drug operation and hiring hitmen. So
we didn't know that at that time. We would
right.
come to learn.
Yeah, no. And again, for people that are listening, go check out the A&E documentary. It really is fascinating. Gary is interviewed, and like I said, a bunch of other people are interviewed. So Silk Road is gone.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm assuming things have replaced it, right? I mean, there are other now. I mean, again, I don't have Tor. I've never gone looking, but I'm assuming that it's too much money. And now that he's sort of shown people, I imagine that there are other people out there that are now doing this. Can you comment? I assume the government is aware of it and trying to combat it, but can you comment on any of that?
I mean, yes. I mean, like, I can comment on it. Mr. Ulbricht changed the game. There's no denying that. It's like when Napster came out and what happened to the music business. When the site was taken down, they saw how much money he made. Now, people for the IRS, when we were investigating it, we knew this. We was like, hey, look how much money is involved here. And I think a lot of people didn't really realize, because what he was selling on the website was individual use or small, relatively small purchases. Well, a lot of what we do is for bulk purchases, kilos, how much you're doing, cash drop-offs, all these big type transactions. But he was dealing in small transactions. But when they saw the scope of how much money he made in such a short time, you can't erase that. So yes, they are going to probably be selling drugs this way for a very long time. And what is the government doing? In a lot of ways, he's changed law enforcement. I mean, when I started, it was kind of just like me and my computer and my hotspot. Now we have cyber squads on both sides of the country. We have cyber coordinators in every field office. Every agent is getting cyber training and virtual currency training. So, and it's not just us. We don't have the monopoly on this. It's the genie is out the bottle. So if Mr. Olbricht's goal was to make his mark on the world, he did. I'll leave it to others to make a decision on whether they think it's good or bad or somewhere in between. But yes, it will be going on. They're just never going to be like Silk Road, because the first is always different. And the copycats, they might even do it better. But because now most of the sites, it's just about money. Everyone knows it's just about making money.
Yeah, well, that again, some of the drug dealers that they interviewed in that special really got annoyed with his politics. They were like, "Oh, then it all became about his politics, and we were there just to make money." I mean, drug dealing hasn't changed whether you're on a street corner or you got the Amazon or the dark net. It's all about the money. Now, I don't know if you were involved in this, but of course, the headline broke a few months ago about the $1 billion seizure of Bitcoin associated with Silk Road.
Mm-hmm.
Have you, if you don't mind me asking, did you continue working on the case after the prosecution of Ross Ulbricht, or at that point, did you move on? And like the seizure, I know CI announced, Chief Lee announced, I think it was in the fall, the seizure of the Bitcoin associated with Silk Road, which my first thought is, why did it take so long? The guy was imprisoned years ago. Did it take that long to get access to it?
No, I mean, I have to be careful on what I'm talking about. So yes.
And if you can't, can't talk about it is perfectly acceptable on this program.
No, I'll say is the case wasn't just Ross Ulbricht. So the case is still continuing. And I'll just say, as long as we're in public service, we're going to continue working a job. We work it from the beginning to the end. But what I understand that what's in the public about that Bitcoin seizure, it's that it was traceable to Mr. Ulbricht. So my understanding is that what's in public is that it was allegedly stolen from the site. So what's interesting, and I'll just say hypothetically, is that I think at the time they said the Bitcoins moved from 2012. Well, there's a big difference in how much the Bitcoins were worth in 2012 or 13 versus now. Yeah. I believe today it's like $47,750. I believe when we took the site down in 2013, I think Bitcoins was like a little over $100, maybe $120, $130. So when people hear $1 billion, it's sometimes comparing apples to oranges. So
in today's money, it was $1 billion.
My understanding is like whenever that Bitcoins first moved off the site or wherever it was probably worth somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000. So anybody who's familiar with the site.
Oh, so that was the 300. And again, I'm sorry. I keep referencing the documentary. They talked about he had asked one of his vendors to have somebody killed who had been doing work for him because I think it was 350,000 of Bitcoin went missing.
Well, I'll just say this, from what's public is it appeared that Mr. Ulbricht kept approximately, let's say between $250,000 and $400,000 on the site. So think of that as like money in the cash register. So you need a certain amount of money in the cash register to affect transactions. So people are buying, people putting Bitcoins in, sellers are taking their Bitcoins out, you're making change, right? So so let's say if someone were to rob the store at any given time, they might be able to get, let's say, approximately what would be in that value, $250 to $400,000, depending on how much he kept. He didn't keep all the Bitcoins on the site because that would be not very bright. So he kept a certain amount. So regardless of whether it was like you're talking about like this alleged hitman, or you're talking about someone just coming in and, let's say, hacking the place, they might have been able to get off with a certain amount of money. So that's pretty much what I could talk about. But it was released by CI, so it was handled by our agency. But that's as far as I'm going to go.
Okay. No, understood. So it's fascinating. But before I let you go, so Mike Villa, who's also been on the program, is a friend of mine. Mike and I did a program on whistleblowing, something you and I have been talking about. And I wanted you to comment on this, if you're willing to. So we did a whistleblowing program as part of the New England IRS Rep Conference with Lee Martin, who he's the director of the whistleblower office. And Lee's position was everything should come through us. Mike and I then did a podcast where we said, no. Listen, audience, make sure you get file your 211 if you want. Like, I think it's in Utah or wherever. But you want to take that to CI. You want to put it in the hands of people who can look at it and make sure something happens. And one of the things I had commented, and I think I showed you the picture, the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, they have the Ark being wheeled off into a government warehouse. I had that in the slide. Lee didn't appreciate that very much. He said, no, that's not how it works. But it feels that way sometimes. Can you comment, being a supervisory special agent, on that theory that for me, here's what's going to happen. My client comes in, we document as much as we can, get as much specific information as we can. Off the package goes for the 211, and then we'll go a phone call to Gary saying, Gary, I have a whistleblower case. Can I send this over to you? I've never known you to say no, right? So sure, send it over. Is that a good idea? Our position has been that, get it in the hands of CI. What is CI's take on that?
What I would say is my experience is I think it's always good to get CI involved or IRS involved, because I give you a hypothetical. You were talking about this movie, but let's take this Silk-Road. We was talking about it. Now, the individual who was running the site, we seize all these Bitcoins. You were talking about all these big numbers, but imagine if it was a whistleblower, and let's say it was his friend or girlfriend, and says, I know. Well, you want to get that information into law enforcement, because the bottom line is we need to get our hands on that laptop or the evidence. So let's say you're talking to your tax professional or attorney, and you're talking about the kind of whistleblower claim you're thinking about doing. Well, you got to think about what will we need to be successful, because we have to get that information. So yes, some claims, because someone could just walk into a CI office and give information. And I've had this happen in the past. And then it ends up turning into a whistleblower claim. So they give us information, we're taking in the information, we think it's good, but somewhere along the line, the person giving the information says, I want money. Now you can imagine that changes something, because now the person has a motivation. So you have to always assess, why is this person giving you this information? Is it credible? Well, the minute someone says, I want some money, it's just a question. Not to say they're not being credible, but a thought goes into your mind. But
can we can't rely on what they're saying, because they now have an axe to grind. They now have a rationale for us to do something that is personal.
Right. So they have an interest in the outcome. They're not result neutral. They want money. So then it's very incumbent for us to get corroborating information, which sometimes means we actually have to get certain information, certain testimony. And I'll just say is the person can go anywhere in the IRS. They can go directly to the whistleblower claim. They can send it off. But I would suggest in certain cases, it might be best to first go to CI, because we can always get it off to where it needs to go if we can't do something. But if we take it, so let's say someone walks in and say, hey, Gary, you heard about Silk Road? No, I never heard about Silk Road. Well, it's this drug website, and I know that this person's running it. How do you know? They're my friend. I'm dating them. Well, tell me how you know that. This. Well, tell me what you saw. And they said, well, I saw this many Bitcoins. Where? Where were they? Well, it's on this laptop.
Right.
And they give us information. Well, here's the thing is, we're only going to be successful possibly if we get that laptop. So if you have that, I would suggest, yes, it's always best to get CI involved because we just have a lot more tools in our toolbox than potentially other, because some things are going to need, we might need to do a search warrant. We might need to get a testimony. We might need to actually compel people to give information that they don't want to give. So I'm going to give my best pitch that, yes, you want to, if you're around the New Haven area, you may want to find out where your local IRS office is.
Now, how about a whistleblower case? I sent the CI. It's not in Connecticut. They gave it to civil, who went in and clearly didn't do the work. And now it's very frustrating. Here's why. They have a lot of people on cash payroll. So it appears what happened is they gave it to civil that went in and tick and tied everything and walked out and said no change, instead of going by, taking some photos and counting heads out at the work site.
Well, here's the thing is, the way our disclosure rules, and I'm not gonna get into the specific case, but a lot of times we might be doing things that people don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure when I was working on Silk Road, if people said, "Oh, what is that IRS guy? I'm working on taking down this multi-million-dollar drug," they're like, "Get out of here! You're not doing it." So a lot of times it's difficult because you don't know what we're doing. But what I would say is, that's why it's good sometimes to talk to a professional, because they understand the way the system works. Because sometimes, even though we think something occurred, even though we suspect something occurred, it doesn't matter. We have to prove it occurred. Especially, I hear you talk about a cash-based business. Well, I'm sure you have clients. So if I ask them, say, "Oh, well, there's allegations that you were making all these personal expenditures from your business." Well, who's the witness that's going to talk about that? It might be the person you're looking to potentially investigate.
Right.
Well, they might not be so willing to tell you about those things. Like, hey, we heard you're paying a cash payroll. Who are you paying and how much? And where can I find those people? They might say, I'm not answering that question. Yeah. So now, but you still have to prove how much was paid, it was paid in cash, and who it is. So sometimes cases are just hard. And the problem is we can't ever talk about what we're doing. So we could be doing everything and it seems like we're doing nothing. And, possibly maybe we're doing less. But either way, it's just the way disclosure works. Right. I'm sure whoever you gave it to in IRS is working very hard.
They closed it. They sent us a letter. The exam was closed as a no change. That's what pisses me off.
I give people this. I tell people, there's a famous story. I don't know whether it's true, but they say there was a criminal investigation and they walk in, and this is where sometimes you got to learn the ropes. They said that there was a book. So the person comes in to do an investigation. There's a secretary and they're investigating the boss. And let's say the secretary is, she's relatively attractive. So supposedly they do an investigation. So they investigate and they talk to the secretary. They talk to the secretary. The secretary keeps the second set of books. She knows about the second set of books. She's going to be a witness for the government. Now the boss is in a nasty divorce. He's in a nasty divorce, doesn't want to give his wife anything in the divorce settlement. Well, the case is about to go to court and we're about to call the first witness. And they go, well, you can't call that witness because he just married the secretary last night. They knew they were madly in love. And now she's refusing to testify against her husband. You're like, wait, I thought you was getting divorced. Oh, he gave her everything in the divorce settlement. Well, now the secretary, she's the witness to bring in that book, and there's no other witness to bring that book in. Well, guess what? That case goes away. So sometimes that's just the way the system works. Sometimes cases are just hard. So if I told someone, say, hey, if you ever have a case and you hear rumors, let's say the boss is cheating with the secretary, but she's the one keeping the books, maybe you want to lock that testimony in with an affidavit and not wait until later on. Because if you can't get the records in, it doesn't really matter. It's just the way it is in the business, if that makes sense.
It does. And so on that final note, Gary, if people are listening to this and want to contact you, they have information, or they're in another jurisdiction and would like to know who their local, agents are that you can put them in touch with, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, if they want to get a hold of me, I can be found at gary.alford@ci.irs.gov. It's pretty simple. It's my first last name, gary.alford@ci.irs.gov. And you can look up the local CI office. I'm sure you can call up, and hopefully, depending on your jurisdiction, they can put you in contact. If not, if you know somebody, a local rep or somebody, I'm sure they know someone in the IRS, and we can point you in the right direction. Yep, but definitely, if you have a whistleblower claim and you're thinking about, and you want to come to the CI, we definitely will take that information.
Yep. Nope. And same thing. If you're confused, you can contact us. We can certainly find out who to put you in touch with. And if not, we can, through Gary, whoever, we can find out who you need to talk to. So listen, Gary, thank you for taking the time. Silk Road is a fascinating story. Again, anyone who wants to go check out the A&E documentary, it really is an interesting case. And thank you. And you will be joining us for the June 4th full day criminal tax program. We skipped last year because we were planning it and then coronavirus started. This year is completely virtual. But Gary will be there talking about, I think, the use of AI.
Yes. So
expanded use of AI. And the world is shrinking as far as, I just had Darren Guillot, who's the deputy commissioner for SBSE, and he was talking how Damon Rowe, our director of fraud, fraud office of fraud enforcement, and Hank Key, who's the field collections director, figured out, we have so much on virtual currency, we have so much out of FATCA on foreign assets. Why don't we take that and have artificial intelligence run that against every offer that's been filed in the last 2 years, all the uncollectible folks, bankruptcy schedules, and see if those folks actually disclosed the virtual currency and the foreign assets. Criminal referrals from collection this quarter are up 42%.
Yeah, so it looks like it's just not Ross Ulbricht who's using technology. So in an era of, let's say, diminishing resources, we still have to deliver for the taxpayer. So we just have to deliver smarter and use technology. So we have a lot of information. So trying to put that into a usable format that we can leverage to deliver for the American public, I think makes sense.
Yep. So thank you for taking the time for doing this. And everyone will see you on June 4th. But if nothing else, we'll have you back. I mean, there's going to be all kinds of cool stuff. So, Gary, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.